today we're going to be talking about writing from a non-human perspective. This includes fantasy races, this includes aliens, this includes animals, this includes objects. This includes so many various things that we will probably have a longer lesson today. So first we're going to talk about animals. This is a very popular thing to do, especially if you write middle grade. You will probably see lots of things like Guardians of Ga'Hoole, the Warriors series, all of the other series that are written by her that are not cats but are other species of animal, and many, many more that have various ones. There's The Red Wall, there's all sorts of different ones that are written from the animal perspective to the point where I honestly don't know them all. I know I have shelved even more than that. With writing an animal perspective, the main thing that I can recommend first is research. Those people who love that specific animal will be very frustrated with you if you're like, yes, and now all of my cats are vegetarian. And you'll be like, all the cat people will come out of the woodworks and be like, excuse you, they might eat some vegetables, but that does not make them voluntary vegetarians. No way. And other various concepts that might get you a little bit in trouble if you try to attempt them. Nothing wrong with attempting these things if you're doing fantasy. However, if you're doing fantasy like owls, fantasy cats, fantasy elephants, I don't know, whatever you want, that's perfectly acceptable because they're fantasy. But if you are trying to say this is happening in real life, that's when people go, if your research is off. So make sure you know terminology for your animals. Make sure you know the lifestyle of these animals. Make sure you know what they eat, how they sleep, if they typically live in colonies or packs, or if they're more solitary animals. If they're more solitary animals and you have them have a bunch of friends of these other animal types, are they social creatures? Are they less social creatures? Would they be more likely to have friends outside of their species? For example, capybaras are well known for making lots of friends outside of their species and are very social creatures. So the idea of a solitary, grumpy, lone capybara who hates everyone is going to be a little weird. Now, if you want to have it be like a character arc where they slowly become, more friendly and nice and everything, that's great. But if you're just going to be like, no, all capybaras are grumpy and don't make friends, that's wrong. Capybaras love to make friends, and if you were to write about a capybara, more than likely you'd have them be friends with a woodpecker, you'd have them be friends with various fish, you'd have them be friends with all sorts of different animals, because capybaras are very social creatures. Moving on to the next thing. Human concepts. Now, it is perfectly acceptable to humanize them by having them speak, for instance, like in the Warriors. No, don't! No, you're going to hurt yourself! You're dying! Having dialogue, there's nothing wrong with that, because they do speak to each other. And they don't just speak, like, this would be a very hard story to read if you were like, meow, 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 meow. And it's like, I have no idea what's happening. So that's why she has them speak. It's a humanizing concept. However, she has them speak because it's easier to read that way, and animals do speak to each other, even if we don't understand them. That's perfectly fine. Having humanizing concepts, nothing wrong with that. Having them have cultures and religions and all sorts of things like that, totally fine. We don't know, maybe animals do have a religion. We have no idea because we can't speak to them. So there's nothing wrong with having humanizing concepts. The downside of having human concepts is when you start going too far into human concepts, things that animals wouldn't do typically. Again, fantasy is the exception. We're not talking about fantasy. We're talking about things like the Warriors, where it's like, hey, we're trying very hard to make this seem like a realistic thing that could be happening in your backyard with a bunch of stray cats. Theoretically. So, human concepts. For instance, animals don't have wives and husbands. Let's be honest, that's a human concept. Do they maybe have a mate or a partner or a, father of their children? Sure, but they don't have a wife or a husband. That term is reserved solely for humans because it is technically a legally binding contract. Now, I could be totally wrong, but I'm 99% sure the stray cats in your backyard are not making legally binding contracts with other cats to get married. So, more than likely you want to avoid certain human concepts. Other human concepts you want to avoid can depend on the species. For example, there are some species that the mom totally is like, I gave birth to you, but peace out, I'm out now. So having this loving, wonderful relationship with a crocodile mother is never going to happen. Crocodile moms either eat their babies or leave. So having this loving, wonderful crocodile mother, unless you're writing fantasy or a children's book, is never going to happen. This is a human concept. You are forcing a human concept onto their culture. Other things include monogamy. There are lots of animals that are monogamous. True. However, there are other animals, like lions, for instance, that are very much not monogamous. They will absolutely happily have polygamous relationships with any lion nearby. And so as a result, if you write a lion being in a monogamous relationship, that is going to bother some people who read about lions, and they're like, hey, I love lions. Lions are my favorite animal, and that is not how that works. It's also going to be more confusing if you force certain concepts, like if they, like I said, if they are supposed to be in a herd and you have them in a group of a little three. Well, unless you explain why they're in that tiny little group instead of in a herd, it's not going to make a lot of sense, right? If you have a solitary sheep that's like, I'm going to go off on an adventure, that makes sense in a children's novel. But if you're writing a young adult novel about a sheep going off and becoming a warrior, what? Sounds like a cool concept, but he's probably going to have his herd, or at least like 4 or 5 other buddies with him. He's not going to be by himself. Alright. Next thing. Terminology. This goes right alongside research. Make sure that you know what things are called. If there is a group of cats, for instance, you're not just going to say a pack of cats. That's a wolf thing. You could call them a clouder or a clan. Those are both perfectly acceptable terms for cat groups. Alternatively, you're also not going to say hands or feet for most animals. You're not going to say, oh yes, and the lizard grabbed it with his hands. It's like they don't have hands. They have claws, or they have toes, or they have feet. Alternatively, you're not going to say that the raccoon is, grabbing things with its tentacles. That's wrong. So just make sure that you're using the right terminology. Again, not over-humanizing them or totally just using the wrong terminology in the first place. Again, these are mainly just important things because if you're writing an animalistic perspective that could theoretically happen in real life, those who love that type of animal are going to get a little upset if you're using the wrong terminology and you're saying, like, I put my hand on my wife's shoulders and said, good job, honey. That feels very humanoid. I don't know about you, but that does not feel like an interaction that 2 lizards would have, for instance. So it's important that you have these concepts that make them animals, because that's what they are. All right. Now we're coming back to the invention of a culture. There's nothing wrong with inventing a fun animal culture, because we have no idea. Maybe there are fun animal cultures. I don't know. Like in the Warrior series, for instance, they actually have a kind of god/goddess/religion that they pray to. Maybe gods do exist amongst cats. I don't know. But as a result, the way that she crafted it is in such a way that it has a lot of morality and beliefs that surround what cats' behaviors actually are and things like that. So I would say if you are going to create a culture, make sure that it fits with what they already do. For example, if they're very solitary creatures, maybe their god praises solitariness, but there's also a god of like help and friendship, and they're 2 separate gods. Or maybe if they are a pack animal, there's like 2 or 3 different gods, and they are their own, celestial pack. It's important to use this to help influence the culture you create. Because the more cultural depth you can create, the more interesting it is for the reader. However, it also then fits within that animalistic idea that has already been created. Alright, now, as I previously stated, the only exception to this is fantasy. If you are creating a fantasy fill-in-the-blank creature, that is going to change things. But We're just talking about, like I said, theoretically, could this happen in your backyard type of creature stories. All right, next. Aliens. Now, the main issue that you're going to run into if you're trying to write an alien race is that most of the time people don't write the culture any different. They act and somehow have all the same terminology as humans. No. More than likely, they will be just as diverse as, for example, people from ancient Japan and people from ancient America did not have the same culture at all. So you think that someone a million miles away on a different planet is going to have the same culture? Absolutely not. There might be certain similarities. Sure, there are certain things that overlap, but there's not going to be an exact identical phase over. As a result, it's important to create a culture that is unique and different from ours. Take aspects of ours and say, what if this? What if we were all ruled by one king on the same planet and we all had to give offerings to this king and it was supposedly that he was, the god of this planet? That would be a very interesting culture. Or alternatively, if everyone lived in their own little village and each village had their own king, that would get kind of weird, kind of fast. You also, though, like I said, probably want to create new terminology. For example, you can, instead of calling them a king, maybe you can make up a term like oblux. I don't know. You could come up with a fun name for their ruler, because just saying king doesn't quite fit if you're creating your own race and their own terminology. Just like, for example, in real life, Chinese emperor. We don't call it an emperor typically. We typically call them a king because of the fact that we mostly are European descent, and Europeans called it a king. But in China, it was an emperor or empress. And so as a result, this is a different terminology. Now we're going to talk about features. So, we need something that we can relate to. Typically, you're not going to describe an alien so bizarre that we're just like, I can't even imagine that. What is that? Typically, you're going to have things you can relate to. Do they have eyes like a cat's? Do they have horns like a sheep? Do they have tentacles like an octopus? Give us something to relate to. Or even if there's not something to relate to, you can still describe it. Is their head light bulb shaped? I don't know. Give us something that we can grasp that makes it so that we're like, oh, I can see that in my head. Because descriptions, nothing wrong with having crazy, fun descriptions. But if it gets too crazy, then the person goes, I don't know how to imagine that. If you're saying, they have a head like a bulbous object. Like, well, what bulbous object? An eggplant, a roll of toilet paper, a light bulb. This is when it starts getting problematic. Or alternatively, when you're saying sounds. Like their voice sounds like the beat of a hummingbird's wing colliding with a windshield of a 285 Honda Civic. We're like, what does that sound like? That's too specific, to the point where the reader goes, what? You want to be a little bit more subtle and say, sounds like the hum of an engine, but on certain letters it almost feels like something got caught in that engine. That's a little bit more relatable, right? Alright. This is also an important thing to remember when it comes to fantasy races. However, we're talking about plants next. Not a lot of books are written from the point of view of plants. However, it is important to talk about because there are some that are written from the point of view of plants. Make sure to, again, like with the animals subject, do your research on how the plant works. Maybe create a culture on how that works, or even let it influence how the world works for this plant. Are they a really, really slow-growing plant, and so as a result they're like the sloths in Zootopia, and they're like, or are they a really fast-growing plant, so they sound like a very hyper 2-year-old, hi, I'm the best friend of you, and you're the best friend of me, and we'll be best friends forever, yay! Having these things can really help influence how we write it. So don't fight against it. Don't be like, oh, well, plants, I don't care how they reproduce. I don't care how they get more soil. I don't care how they get more water. Those can actually be things that you can use to create a culture, if you wanted to, for this plant, to create a personality for this plant. Again, the exception is, as always, fantasy. Speaking of which, we're going to talk about fantasy races now. All right. Now, as we already mentioned before, create your own culture, create your own terms, create your own world. Go as crazy or not crazy as you want. You can absolutely lean into the Europeanism for certain ones. For example, dwarves. Dwarves were created by Scandinavian, European type incentives and people. As a result, using terms like king isn't going to be too weird because that's where it came from. However, if you're talking about a Japanese water nymph and you're saying, yes, they have a king, no, they probably have an emperor or empress. So if you want to draw from the culture they're from, that's great. But I would say otherwise, create your own terminology. If you created a whole new race, create your own terminology. What do they call it instead of a king or a queen? What do they call it instead of a country, perhaps? You don't have to go that deep. That's more epic fantasy levels. If you want to just keep it more high fantasy levels, you can just stick to the normal terminology of king and queen. However, it is important to think about lots of other things. For example, lifespan. This especially comes into play if you're writing about things like elves. Most of the time, people do elves wrong, which is going to sound weird. But typically, they're 12 at age 12. Not necessarily. Because of their extra long lifespan, do you really think that they would see them as emotionally mature at age 12? No. More than likely, they'd see them as like, oh, little baby, you're such a small, because of the fact that they live for thousands of years. And so seeing a little 12-year-old is the equivalent of seeing a 1-year-old to us. They think that they're just a teeny tiny little baby. So it's important to take that lifespan into account. Or alternatively, if they have a super short lifespan, that's important to take into account too. Back in the Renaissance age, funny story, back in the Renaissance age, because of the fact that the life expectancy and lifespan of humans was so short, it made it so that most of the time, Romeo and Juliet, how everyone is like, they're just teenagers, they don't really know anything about love. She was an old maid back then. 16, she was like, should have been married 3 years ago. Like, based on the lifespan of humans, she was like, not only an adult, but she was like, getting into the point where it's like, you won't even get married because you're freaking ancient. So, like, I know that everyone bashes on it now, but back then, that was actually a perfectly acceptable, reasonable age. And if anything, she was over age. So, as far as lifespan goes, this is important to look into with your fantasy races and cultures, because if they have a longer or shorter lifespan, that is going to affect how it's looked at. For example, the Aarakocra in D&D have a very short lifespan. As a result, you could have a 4-year-old Aarakocra in your party, because they're considered an adult. Because their lifespan is so incredibly short. So, point being that this can play into and have a heavy aspect in your culture and how things look. All right, next. Values/morals. This is also going to affect your culture, but it's also going to affect how you look at things with your fantasy race. Does your fantasy race believe in an eye for an eye? So they're a very stabby culture. Do they believe in, like, only peace and we shall never lay a hand against someone else? And so if someone else comes to, attack them, they get wiped out. Do they believe in, having vengeance? Do they believe in justice? Do they believe in honor? These are all big, huge concepts that are going to change and shape your culture. They do even in human cultures, right? So having them in a fantasy culture, you could totally go all out with it. I mean, heck, even in today's culture, we have a much more youth-based culture in America. And so as a result, a lot of elders unfortunately get neglected and thrown to the wayside. And I think that's sad and tragic. However, Japan and China have a very elder-centric culture. In fact, youth means nothing. You will respect your elders and you will help take care of them when they get older. And I think that's great. I think that's a great way to look at it. However, That doesn't mean that one is bad or one is good. It just means that it's a very different value system. And depending on what you believe in and what you value, that is going to change your culture. So, something to think about with your fantasy races. Last thing to think about is lifestyle. For example, to give a human example, slavery, no longer acceptable, right? In most places, I will say in most, because there are a few cultures left that still believe in that and think it's great. Most cultures don't think slavery is acceptable, right? But if you had gone back to before the Civil War, perfectly acceptable. In fact, it was frowned upon if you didn't have a slave. You only have one slave? So poor. It was seen as like a sign of status to have a lot of slaves, right? That lifestyle is going to change their entire culture, like it did back then. There are a lot of even recipes and things like that that have infiltrated our knowledge from either being a slave or being a rich person, and those types of lifestyles are going to change things. Escargot, for instance, was a poor man's food, and yet now it's considered the lap of luxury. Because of the fact that before, it was like I found a couple snails in my garden and I made them taste okay. And it was during a poor depression time in France. However, that lifestyle has now become an extravagant one as time has progressed and moved on because of the fact that we don't need to eat snails anymore, so we eat them because we want to. So it's fancy and cool. Another great example is minimalism versus maximalism. Do you have a tiny amount of clothes and items and things like that? Japan has a very minimalist culture, and that's why you'll notice when you watch an anime or any show that takes place into some sort of Japanese culture, you'll probably notice they mostly live in apartments. Not just because they live on an island and there's limited amounts of space, but because of the fact that they truly believe in minimalism, only having what space you need. Whereas America, we're maximalists, right? We have as many clothes as we want, and a huge house, and all these kinds of things. We believe that we need more space. But we don't necessarily need this space, right? And so it's about how and what we believe in. Now, I'm not saying one is good or one is bad, but I am saying that they are distinctly different lifestyle values. So you can use that to benefit your own fantasy culture. Are your fairies minimalists because they're so tiny, or are they maximalists because they are like, I take over the whole forest and the tree is my mansion? You know, that can really show you a different type of lifestyle for your fantasy races. All right. Last thing we're going to talk about is objects. Again, a rare one, but one that needs to be talked about nonetheless. If you're writing from the point of view of a river, or even if you're writing a short story from the point of view of a couch, I don't know. That would be a very interesting story. You need to know the history of that object. Think about it. How much has this river been through? Are you writing from the point of view of the water running through the river, or are you writing from the point of view of a rock in the river? Are you writing from the point of view of a river as a sentient being as a whole, and the rocks and the water and everything are just bits and pieces like hands and fingers and toes? This is going to change how you write from this object's point of view. Alternatively, you can also look into the lifespan of these objects. For example, if we were to say write from the point of view of a couch. Now I really want to write a story from the point of view of a couch. Anyway, if you were to write from the point of view of a couch, how long does the average couch last? What type of couch is it? Is it the type of couch that like immediately breaks down and so its lifespan's very short, or is it one of those couches that gets passed on to kids and grandkids and great-grandkids because it's such a good, hardy couch and it's so well built? Is it the type of couch that people like toss in their living room for decor, or is it the type of couch that people use to, you know, have the random family member that came over last minute sleep on because there's nothing else in the house? You know, it's a tiny house and they're like, you can sleep on the couch, buddy. This is going to change how your story functions as the history of these objects. All right. Any questions about writing from non-human point of view before I turn off the video and discuss writer's stuff? No? All right. So, just as a reminder, first chapter contest is due on November 30th. This is the 2024 contest, in case any of these videos get watched later down the line. Please turn them in preferably before the 30th. However, keep in mind that they are not due until the 30th, so if you don't get them done till the last minute, that's fine. You do have to turn them in person, and you do have to come in before we close that day. So let me double check to see whether that's early closure day or a late closure day, just to be positive. It is an early closure day. So please try to get it in before 5:45 p.m. If you don't get it in before 5:45 p.m., I'm sorry, I have told my coworkers that if it is not in before 5:45 p.m., then they are allowed to say no to you unless you call ahead and say, hey, I'm on my way and I will be there before 6. We lock the doors at 6. I'm sorry, if you're pounding on the doors at 6, we will not let you in. Please try to turn it in before 5:45 that day. The next contest after that is due on December 21st, and it is to write a cozy mystery that takes place during Christmas. I don't care what the mystery is. You can have a murder, you can have who stole Santa's cookies and have it be an adorable children's story. I don't care, as long as there is a mystery and it takes place during Christmas. Okay. Alright, I'm going to turn the video off now. If you guys have any suggestions of lessons that I should do, feel free to leave them in the comments or tell me afterwards.